Welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Church of Utica. I'm Glenn Coyne, a member of the worship committee here. Whether you are visiting for the first time or have been a member for many years, you are welcome here. Whatever faiths you have known, if any, you are welcome here. Whoever you are and whomever you love, you are welcome here. We are invited to bring our whole selves to this worship service, our doubts as well as our convictions, the pain and the joy we have known, our longing for connection and understanding. Every part of you is welcome here. If you're signing in today for the first time, we're glad you're here, and we hope you'll stay for informal conversation in breakout groups after the service. One announcement today, please see this week's newsletter for an announcement about our church partnering with several local nonprofits to make improvements to Utica's Proctor Park, which includes creating a designated peace garden and planting indigenous grasses and trees. The board enthusiastically agreed to join others in this project, as it so clearly aligns with our commitment to social and climate justice. The newsletter includes a detailed prospectus of the project, so please check it out. And feel free to reach out to Carol Gable if you have additional questions. And now, let us open our hearts and minds to the experience of community and the wisdom of love.
Good morning, I'm Tammy Tenarowitz, and I'm a member of our UU Utica. We have a chalice lighting that I wrote this morning. We light our chalice to unite us in beloved community, a symbol of our coming together for this time together. Let us embrace our commitment to this sacred time of community.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Reverend Lori Staubitz, and I want to share some words to open our worship this morning from a Sufi poet, Hafiz, and some of you have heard me share this before, but he wrote in the 1300s, and his words are, I think, very true for us today. He said, "We have not come here to take prisoners, but to surrender ever more deeply to freedom and joy. We have not come into this exquisite world to hold ourselves hostage from love. Run, dear ones, from anything that may not strengthen your precious budding wings. Run quickly from anyone likely to put a sharp knife into that sacred, tender vision of your beautiful heart. For we have not come here to take prisoners or to confine our wondrous spirits, but to experience ever and ever more deeply our divine courage, freedom, and light. Come, let us worship together this morning." Please join in singing our opening hymn, "Come Now, Font of Every Blessing," number 126.
Come, thou fount of every blessing, tune our hearts to sing thy grace. Streams of mercy never ceasing, call for songs of loudest praise. While the hope of life's perfection fills our hearts with joy and love, teach us ever to be faithful. May we still thy goodness prove. Come, thou fount of every vision, lift our eyes to what may come. See the lion and the young lamb dwell together in thy home. Hear the cries of war fall silent, feel our love glow like the sun. When we all serve one another, then our heaven is begun. Come, thou fount of inspiration, turn our lives to higher ways. Lift our gloom and desperation. be fair as heaven above.
Hi everyone, welcome to Together Time. Our story today is called The Crossroads at Four Corners, and it was written by our very own Reverend Laurie Staubitz. It goes like this. Four Corners is known as a crossroads, as many people from the four corners of the earth, north, south, east, and west, live here. Each family brings their own different ways to this place, but I wouldn't call Four Corners a neighborhood. For the most part, everyone keeps to themselves, except for the occasional angry stare or silent ignoring that goes on between neighbors. If someone dares to raise a concern, everyone keeps quiet, hoping things will calm down again. They like to think of their neighborhood as peaceful, but all that silence comes at a cost. It wasn't always this way. Once there was a great garden right in the heart of the neighborhood. Each year, neighbors would gather to plan, till, plant, weed, and harvest, always ending the year with a great celebration and feast. Everyone agreed upon how to garden and what would be planted, so it was easy. But as new folks moved in, they brought new ideas with them. The neighbors at Four Corners liked things just as they were, so you can see how the problems got started. It was late winter and plans for the annual meeting were underway. One new African-American family from the South looked forward to joining in and planned to bring a package of okra seeds to add to the planting mix. A young Asian couple from the East hoped that bok choy would grow along with the usual lettuce and spinach patches. With all these new ideas coming forward, two quiet Latina women spoke up for jalapeno peppers. Well, as word got out about the possible changes, longtime residents reacted with silent rage. How dare these people mess with the garden plans? A few longtime residents ranted to one another, saying, "There is nothing wrong sticking to the plan. Something has to be done to stop all this nonsense." Without a word, the garden plans went as usual, and nothing new was planted in the soil. No one dared to stand up to say, "Let's try this," or "Why don't we learn more?" For everyone was afraid that they would be adding to the problem. One by one, the newcomers withdrew, keeping their families and their ideas to themselves. Along with the regular tomatoes, squash, and beans, something else began to take root in the Four Corners garden. In hushed secrets, people talked about one another. Who was to blame? It was like a hidden poison had crept into the hearts of the people. Before long, even the old garden withered and died. And so it goes. The evil does not lurk out there. Most often, evil doesn't start as a big problem. It unfolds, little by little, in and through our everyday reactions with others. You might be surprised to know that Four Corners is not far from us. In fact, we come to a crossroads anytime we need to make choices or decisions about which way to go, who to follow, or where to stand. Our choice can lead us toward a better life or destroy the life we share. What is my responsibility here? Should I act? Will I share? Can I forgive? Are important questions to ask during times of disagreement or change. Theologian Henry Nelson Wieman was a Unitarian religious thinker who wrote in the 1940s during World War II. He wanted to change the ways we think about evil. Henry didn't believe in a devil or something out there that makes us do bad things. In fact, he taught that many times good things, like the Four Corners garden, can turn bad when we choose to keep all things just as they are and to turn our backs on new ideas or creative change. So today, I invite you to look at where you stand when it comes to welcoming change. There is a hidden power in our everyday choices. The problem with evil is an old one and needs to be addressed in every age. Ancient Hebrew scripture speaks to the power of life-giving choices. Deuteronomy 30:19 states, I call heaven and earth to witness against you today that I have set before you life and death, blessings and cursings. Choose life so that you and your descendants may live. And that's the end. Until next time, I'll see you later. Bye-bye.
Glenn Coyne is going to lead us in community candles.
Now we will practice community candles, or candle, as it were. There it is. Which is an opportunity for the congregation to be with one another as we mark notable things happening in our lives. Keep in mind, this is a time of personal, not political, reflection. If you would like to light a candle where you are, please do so, and in frame if you'd like. If you would like to briefly share about a significant event in your life and have me light a virtual candle, please unmute yourself or type into the chat. You can also privately message me in the chat to light a candle in silence for you. For sharing, I will now light a candle for all the joys and sorrows that remain unspoken, but in our hearts and minds. And now we will take up an offering. Excuse me. Today's offertory is from Victoria Weinstein. The purpose of the church is to encourage all who gather there to grow more generous in spirit and action. This is the great end of all the world's faith traditions, to bring the human being closer to the divine by acts of creation and compassion. The offering allows us to exercise that all-important generosity of spirit, an offering that will support the self-supporting church and its many ministries. The gifts of the congregation will be most gratefully received.
we will now hear some words of wisdom from Glenn Coyne.
Thank you, Reverend Lori. In my late teens, I accepted Jesus Christ as my Savior. I read my Bible dutifully, I attended church regularly, and I prayed fervently for God's guidance. And I did indeed hear a voice of guidance, the same one I had been listening to since childhood. It was a voice of conscience and compassion that my parents had instilled in me many years before they started attending church in midlife. That voice of compassion is the font of human goodness, the lodestone of our morality. And it originated in a past far deeper than our parents or their parents. In fact, it comes from a time before even Homo sapiens. Archaeological evidence shows that even Neanderthals cared for the sick and the disabled. It's deeper than that. Primatologist Franz de Waal, who studies the social interactions of our closest relatives, the bonobo, writes that our caring and tenderness for each other predates humanity. The moral law arises from ingrained values that have been there since the beginning of time, de Waal says. The most fundamental one derives from the survival value of group life. The desire to belong, to get along, to love and to be loved, prompts us to do everything in our power to stay on good terms with those upon whom we depend. And so goodness is at once a group survival skill and a personal moral code. Evolution and morality need not be at odds, and nature is not always red in tooth and claw. To thrive, humans, like our fellow primates past and present, need one another. And so we humans empathize with each other's pains and joys and pay forward the ancient gifts of goodness. Thank you.
So everyone held their breath, waiting for their beloved pastor, John Robinson, to deliver his sermon. And as he was standing before his liberal fold in 1620, he was keenly aware of the importance of this moment because he was delivering parting words. But it was not Reverend Robinson that was departing. It was many of his leaders and reformers from within his church that were leaving Leiden, and they were furthering their efforts to establish new congregations independent from the Church of England. So he longed to join them on their pilgrimage, but he would stay behind. But these folks that were leaving, these reformers, would later establish themselves at Plymouth. They would go on to be pilgrims in the New World. But his words to them on that morning, July 2nd, 1620, were fortuitous and they were direct. And his charge, to preserve the religious freedom they now cherished. And here's a paraphrase from Robinson's message to the pilgrims. For me, I cannot tell you how disappointed I am by the condition of the Reformed churches who have come to a point in religion and go no further than the instruments of their Reformation. The Lutherans cannot be drawn to go beyond what Luther saw, and whatever part of God's will was revealed to Calvin, he would rather die than to embrace it. And the Calvinists stick to where they left off with that man. Though they were burning lights in their times, they did not penetrate into the whole of God. If they were still living, would that they be willing to embrace still further light beyond that which they first received. He cautioned them to not enshrine their truth or their ways, because enshrining them would ultimately lead to a dead and entombed faith. He asked that they remain ever open to receiving new and ongoing revelation. You know, the essence of our liberal religious tradition is captured in Robinson's words, and they are as true for us this morning as they were then. And as Unitarian Universalists, we are descendants of the Pilgrim Church. So in every age, human spirituality unfolds in new ways and challenges the forms that it's taken in the past, challenges the structures and the functions. But we have a role to play in this ongoing revelation, this ongoing great unfolding. But the questions before us will be, are we able to recognize new insight and inspiration for the precious gifts they are as they are coming to us? Or will we stand with doors closed or doors open to new truth, knowing that it will come from very unlikely sources and with some measure of sacrifice on our part? You know, Charles Darwin totally rocked the Christian world. In fact, he rocked all traditions with evolutionary theory. And then again, in World War II, that was an axial change, because no longer could people continue to conceive of the God that they had in mind and still reconcile that with what they were experiencing with the rise of the Reich and the Nazi Holocaust and the Jewish Holocaust. And this was the time that Henry Nelson Wieman, who was a professor and also a naturalistic Christian, he wanted to reconcile Christianity with science. This was a time when science was bringing forth out of evolutionary theory the sense of process and ongoing growth and transformation. Things were not fixed. Nothing was fixed. And so this totally changed the way not only science, but theologians thought about God, about divinity, about religion, and about human development. One of his best known works is The Source of Human Good, and it came out in 1946. And in it, he describes the creative event. In this creative event, this is the process of the unfolding for Wieman for God. It wasn't somebody out there. It wasn't an anthropomorphic deity. It was this process within life itself. And he divided this creative event into 4 sub-events. He said that the first one was just for humans, the process of becoming conscious and becoming aware of a new meaning emerge as it emerges. To be curious and kind of wonder, what is coming from this? The question, what's coming from this? Many of us have asked that question during the past few years. What is coming from this, if anything? And then the second step was that kind of integration of what was coming forth, integration into life and manifesting it and through what we are already doing, building it in for further growth. And then there was this sense of this qualitative richness that would expand, enlarge the meaning of what it meant to be human, what it meant to live in community, to deepen our relationships. Those were the 4 different things that he wanted to kind of identify as the process of God at work in human life. This idea of this building was the word, he used the word concrescence. And concrescence was the sense that there's something greater than the sum of the parts happening here. And he would go on to say that even during times of great disaster, which we may actually see ourselves in right now, that there's some emergence happening of this creative process that is good and true, and it's an ultimate good, not just good for this time, but good for all time and carries through. An example of this for Wieman was the life of Jesus. He did not see Jesus as a divine figure. He saw Jesus as a teacher who was able to build this kind of concrescence, because wherever he went and gathered folks together, there was this unfolding of greater meaning to the point where people felt transformed. That he would call God at work in and through human life. So for Wieman, the creative process is a source of human good that's absolute good under all circumstances. This is not true of all good. For what is valuable for one time and place, person, or culture will not be so in others. The creative event is good even though it often works against what we would desire and destroys existing structures in the self and in society in order to bring about new revelation, new good. It's trustworthy, and it always works to bring about the best results possible under all circumstances, even when the result is the radical realignment of our values and our beliefs. The radical realignment of our values and beliefs. Those who are participating in dismantling white racism, that's what we're talking about here. The dismantling of our values and our beliefs to give forth new meaning and greater community. Wieman would go on to say that whatever fosters creative communication is good, and whatever obstructs it is evil. Goodness is not measured by happiness, satisfaction, or desire. It's not measured by getting what you want. Creativity alone, he says, is the standard for good. So unpacking Wieman it gets a little heady. So I really wanted to bring a story to you this morning that I think kind of highlights this. And this is actually a story out of my own experience. You know, during the 1960s in the capital of the Confederacy in Richmond, Virginia, a brave Unitarian Universalist congregation dared to host the first interracial high school dance. They even had to have police come in order for those teens to come together and have that dance. And they would go on to integrate their congregation, and they would appoint leadership to the board, to an all-white board. They would promote African-American leadership. In fact, they even supported the development of a Unitarian Universalist congregation south of the city to start a new African-American UU start. And this was back in the 60s. But 40 years later, when I was with that congregation, I asked a board member who was also a city attorney what he thought about reaching out to the neighborhood, because this was an urban church. And many of the neighbors around us were African-American. And with a straight face, he informed me that as Unitarian Universalists, that we are an intellectual group, and that he didn't think that the idea of inviting these people was a good idea at all. Well, knowing the history of that church, I was stunned. And it brought home the fact that life-giving power can flow, but it also can be obstructed. This obstruction can become an insidious form of evil if we do not tend to it, if we do not stay vigilant to help the continuation of its great unfolding. We are a witness to some of this subtlety in our own lives, in ways that things play out in family dynamics and within our day-to-day relationships and within religious community. You know, Judy and Carl were parents that were very excited about their daughter, Joy, when she found her partner, Vicki, and they announced their engagement. They were so excited, and they had been such a support to this young couple and intended to continue that support and help to see them into the next step of the journey. into marriage. However, Judy and Carl had very set ideas on the ways that their small family celebrated the holidays, especially Christmas Eve. Well, Joy and Vicki let them know that they would join them for Christmas morning, that they had made plans with Vicki's family for Christmas Eve. And that is when Judy and Carl became enraged. The weeks before the holiday were just driven with the strife that this couple, from the anger and the bitterness that was coming from the parents, because they demanded that things stay the same. What was a love fest had quickly turned into just hostility, as Judy and Carl blamed Vicki's parents, and also started to triangulate in friends and family to gain support for their position. And it wasn't long before that kind of stress on this new couple played out in such a way that they actually ended their relationship before the holidays even started. If we are to remain true to our heritage and to the power of our faith and our principles, we will need to be able to develop ways to recognize first and foremost something beautiful and loving and good awaits in each moment, to be allowed space, allowed a place to come through. So how are we preparing ourselves to grow forward? You know, unlike many traditions, we do not have a set fixed belief in a set of statements that we recognize as true. We are asked to look at and to reflect upon sacred scripture, to reflect upon our heritage, to reflect upon our past, and to look at the ways things are unfolding. You know, Karen Mollenkott built on Wieman's theology. She was a feminist theologian in the 1980s, and she wrote a book called Godding. And for her, God was not a noun. God was a verb. And so this kind of apprehending possibility of manifesting new and greater good is what she would refer to. And this is the kind of participation we are being asked to consider this morning, that we are in the process of Godding. Whether you're a theist or an atheist or humanist, this idea that this process is at work in life, in our lives. Gordon McKeeman, one of my very favorite elders of Universalism, who's no longer with us, wrote this for the Harper's Ferry Study Group in 2000. Few years before he died. He said, the impulse toward wholeness is what I count on in the quest for power to accomplish something. This impulse has been called the soul or the spirit or the inner light. It is what I address in sermons. I try to summon the awareness of it, to bring it into consciousness. Some don't remember its presence without some prompting. I help people recognize that religious communities' health and their own is intimately connected, and that they contribute to it through their time, their talent, and their self-awareness and their interaction with others. We have a responsibility to lead the religious institution, our church, in becoming a source of power. We are called to do this in the midst of a group of people who are overwhelmingly devoted to individualism, that would be us, and consequently suspicious of institutions, that would be us. One result of this pervasive distrust, he says, has been that we have sought to keep our institutions as weak as possible without actually killing them. We are committed only to searching for the truth, but with considerable apprehension lest we find some, only to discover that finding a truth compromises our freedom by demanding our allegiance to it. Our own self-interest requires us to make commitments on behalf of this growth, maturity, and well-being in the world, our wholeness, and in religious life itself. Every gain, every time a person takes a step towards a more inclusive self, learning to love one more person, understanding one more step further, they are involved in this mission of universal salvation. Well, Joyce Holliday was a writer for a religious publication called Alive Now. And I want to share a story that she shared about a group of Salvadorians who'd crossed the borders from El Salvador to escape genocide. They made their way into Honduras and they were put into refugee camps, something we are all too familiar with. The camp's conditions were dreadful and they were crowded, and many families had come far and had already lost loved ones along the way. Although the refugee camp offered shelter, it was no guarantee for the harsh realities because there were people faced dangers, continued dangers, even while in the camps. National Guard authorities had tracked down one young man and forced him out of the camp while his young wife and 5 children lived on. But in one part of the camp, there was a group of women, small, they were surrounded a small infant, and through the night with a lit candle, they sang while the mother put drops of fluid into this infant to resurrect some life back into this poor little soul. So you can imagine the conditions were very dire. But in the midst of all this sorrow, the camp burst into preparation for celebration. The women, some of the women baked sweetbreads in adobe ovens that they had made. The men prepared meat from whatever was available for tamales, and we might not want to know what was in those tamales, but decorations were created by the children out of discarded medicine boxes and foil from margarine wrappers, and they hung them in the trees to make decorations. While they were doing this, there was a USA church worker who had been assigned to the camp for several months, who was totally overwhelmed by the devastation, and to the point where she really couldn't interact. She was going through the motions, tending, to do what she needed to do during the day, but was withdrawing from really socializing in any way because she was just so devastated. Well, one of the people came over to her noticing that she wasn't there, and one of the refugee women sought her out and came and asked why she wasn't coming to join the celebration. And the worker said that she was so grieved about the conditions that she just wasn't able to do anything beyond just her meager service to the people. And the refugee woman, gently comforted her and said, "Don't you know that you cannot join us in our struggle unless you can play and celebrate with us too?" She reminded the worker that every time the refugees were forced to move and seek new shelter, they did 3 things. First, they set up a construction committee. Then they set up an education committee. And then they set up a joy committee. Celebration was as basic to the life of these people as digging latrines and teaching their children. And the author has this reflection. She says, just as people with the least are often the most grateful and generous, I have found that people who suffer most are often the most joyful, an irony of living faithfully. Their joy is something wholly other than the sort of shallow happiness that material things and comforts offer. It comes not from trying to avoid pain by curing comforts, but rather by moving deeply into the pain of life and finding reasons to rejoice in the midst of embracing what is difficult. Viktor Frankl would affirm this same kind of joyous, revolutionary spirit that perhaps is maybe the most radical thing we can do when we are faced with devastating loss, which is partly described by our times. He said that in the camps, he wrote in Man's Search for Meaning, he said that in the camps, concentration camps, he said that many of the people would offer and share their last piece of bread with those that needed it more. He was witness to this kind of goodness that was coming out of just incredible, devastating times. And we live in challenging times too. And we too can embody this source of human good that is transformative and creates hope in hopelessness under all circumstances. And so I leave you with a question, two questions actually, and an invitation. How is creative good arising in and through you? And how are you going to align yourself with the creative good that you are collectively bringing to bear forth a future for this congregation? Well, I invite you to join with me Wednesday, March 24th in the evening at 6:30 to a time to explore theological reflection, which is a tool to help tease out this mysterious sense of what is rising and answer the question, what good do we need to pay attention to? And how do we get on board with this creative process? So I invite you to join in that time. And one of my my next favorite Hafiz poems I'll close with. Stop being so religious. He said, what do sad people have in common? It seems that they have built a shrine to the past and often go there to do a strange wail and worship. What is the beginning of happiness? It is to stop being so religious like that. Bless you all. So may it be. This next closing hymn has special meaning for me. I once heard a minister say that one of the things she loved about being a minister is she got to know what the it was in It Sounds Along the Ages. And it's this traditional hymn that we have that I think speaks to the ways that this kind of process continues to unfold through the ages. So please join in singing It Sounds Along the Ages. And special thanks to our folks who have put this together for us today.
It sounds along the ages, soul answering to soul. It kindles on the pages of every Bible in heaven no perfect stature, and no place of steady view. Forever on resounding and knowing not of time, a most catch music of its eternal chime.
We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we meet again.
And in closing, know that you are a good gift. And it is through you and your life and your experience that this process of great unfolding will continue to bring forth good. So therefore, good people, think hard and reflect on what you have to offer and pay attention and listen to all that is around you, because something beautiful is coming forth. Go now in peace and be led back in joy.
Smile, though your heart is aching. Smile, even though it's breaking. When there are clouds in the sky, you'll get by if you smile through your fear and sorrow. Smile, and maybe tomorrow you'll see the sun come shining through for you. Light up your face with gladness, hide every trace of sadness. Although a tear may be ever so near, that's the time you must keep on trying. Smile, what's the use of crying? You'll find that life is still worthwhile if you just smile. Up your face with gladness, hide every trace of sadness. Although a tear may be ever so near, that's the time you must keep on trying. Smile, what's the use of crying? You'll find that life is still worthwhile